The nanites fell like silver rain, each speck smaller than pollen but engineered to end worlds quietly. Dr. Adrian Cole watched his daughter Maya fold paper with desperate concentration, her 7-year-old fingers working against time they didn't have. Around them, children from a dozen worlds stood silent as the metallic specks settled on their skin. "Papa," Maya whispered, pressing the crane into his palm. "What should we tell them?" Adrian felt the first metallic tingle creep up his arms. His emergency beacon was already transmitting its final message to Earth Defense Command. Sanctuary protocols now active. The garden is gone. "Remember what grows in darkness. Tell them we tried to help," he said softly. Maya's eyes were already growing distant. "That we tried to be good?" "Yes, sweetheart. That we tried." The crane tumbled from her fingers as silence claimed them both. 7 hours early, Adrian worked his fingers through the tomato bed, checking root systems the way his grandfather had taught him, feel for the thread-fine connections that meant life had taken hold. 37 years of coaxing growth from reluctant soil had taught him patience, timing, and the art of knowing when to disturb things just enough to make them stronger. "They're fighting again." Maya appeared beside him, wearing the exasperated look reserved for adults who clearly didn't understand playground politics. Near the community garden, refugee children had formed a circle around sheets of recycled hull plating. Kes crouched in the center, her silver-scaled fingers demonstrating origami folds, while Human, Vorthan, and Zlathy youngsters watched with unusual intensity. "Each fold matters," Kes was explaining, her accent making the words precise as cut crystal. "Sloppy work makes birds that can't fly right." A Vorthan boy, one of the twins from last month's transport, snorted. "Waste of time. Things that can't really fly shouldn't pretend." Maya planted her fists on her hips. "Maybe things don't have to fly to be important." Adrian smiled despite the growing tightness in his chest. His wristcom had been cycling through priority alerts for the past hour, each one more urgent than the last. Kes held up her completed crane, its wings sharp enough to cut air. Old stories say these carried messages between worlds. Before the wars made space dangerous for small things, the children grew quiet. Even here in their sanctuary, the galaxy's brutality cast shadows that reached everywhere. "What would you tell another world?" Maya asked. Kes closed her eyes, cradling the paper bird like a prayer. "That I don't have to be scared anymore." Adrian's comm finally demanded attention. "Lieutenant Commander Torres," her voice tight with the strain of delivering impossible news. "Adrian?" Long-range sensors tagged a Dominion compliance fleet, 12 vessels. They dropped stealth protocols 20 minutes ago. He kept his voice level, a skill learned from years of explaining why parents weren't coming home. "How long do we have?" 6 hours. Maybe 7 if they stopped to make speeches. Around him, children laughed as paper birds caught evening breezes. Such fragile things, launched into an indifferent sky. "Evacuation protocols," he said quietly. "But the children stay with me until the end. They've been afraid long enough." Commander Vex emerged from his dropship with parade ground precision, each step calculated for maximum psychological impact. His translator rendered clicking mandibles into flat, bureaucratic tones that somehow made everything worse. "Dr. Cole, 17 violations, population density, refugee harboring, interference with lawful operations." Adrian stepped forward, feeling Maya's small hand clutch his jacket. Behind them, David Chen flanked their position, while 47 children from a dozen worlds stood in defiant silence. "Commander, welcome to Haven's Reach. Coffee?" Vex's compound eyes swept the assembled children like a targeting system acquiring locks. "Improper classification. These units are Dominion property. Requisitioned for labor reallocation following homeworld restructuring." David's voice came out strangled. "They're 4 years old. Some of them are 4 years old. Age. Biological accident. Not legal category." Vex gestured to his enforcers with mechanical efficiency. "Human species exhibits evolutionary defect. Excessive empathy. Clouds rational judgment. This infection spreads to other worlds. Disorder requires correction." Maya tugged Adrian's sleeve. When he looked down, she held up a fresh crane. Apparently she'd been folding while the adults argued. "Papa, If birds carry messages, what should we say? Vex observed this exchange with clinical interest. Juvenile attempts negotiation through cultural artifacts. Textbook example of the problem, sentiment treated as policy. Adrian rose slowly, feeling the weight of ending in his bones. Your policy assumes compliance is inevitable. Something shifted in Vex's expression, not anger, but the particular pity reserved for the developmentally disabled. Dr. Cole, dominion tolerance is not weakness. Patience is not indecision. Your mercy has been misinterpreted as cosmic law. We restore clarity. The first nanites began falling then, drifting down like toxic snow. The metallic specks settled everywhere on skin, clothing, the paper cranes scattered around Kess's feet. Adrian felt them on his arms first, a sensation like microscopic insects burrowing through his pores. "I feel sleepy," Maya said, swaying slightly. Around them, other children began to stumble. The nanites worked fast neural mapping, pathway disruption, systematic shutdown, clinical, efficient, leaving infrastructure intact for new management. Adrian gathered Maya close, feeling her familiar weight against his chest. "Remember what we always say about gardening? Sometimes," her voice was getting smaller, "sometimes things have to die so new things can grow?" "That's right, sweetheart." His own vision was beginning to blur as the nanites reached critical concentration in his bloodstream. And the most important thing is planting seeds for someone else to tend. His emergency beacon pulsed against his wrist as he activated it with trembling fingers. The transmission would reach Earth in 18 hours, long enough for the Dominion to broadcast their success across the galaxy, ensuring every world understood the price of sanctuary. "Sanctuary protocols now active," he whispered into the comm. "The garden is gone. Remember what grows in darkness." Maya's crane fell from her fingers. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was the absolute quiet of a garden in winter, waiting for spring that might never come. Admiral Elena Torres walked through streets where 70,000 people had stopped mid-gesture. A Vorthan elder sat frozen at a chessboard, his clawed hand reaching for a piece he would never move. Children's toys lay scattered where they'd fallen. Their owners collapsed beside them like broken dolls. In the community center, she found Maya's paper crane on the floor beside her father's body. The child lay curled against Adrian's chest, her face peaceful as sleep. The crane's wings had partially unfolded, as if it were still trying to fly. Her comm buzzed with reports from across the galaxy. The Dominion was broadcasting their successful compliance action on all frequencies. Their message crystal clear. Mercy was a luxury the galaxy could no longer afford. Torres picked up the crane, smoothing its wrinkled wings with fingers that only trembled slightly. On the memorial wall, hundreds of photographs showed every refugee family Haven's Reach had ever sheltered dozens of species, all sharing the same expression of guarded hope. They'd known this day might come. Adrian had planned for it. "Admiral?" Lieutenant Commander Park's voice cut through the silence. "Earth Command, requesting immediate assessment." Torres studied the photo wall for another long moment, such ordinary faces carrying extraordinary trust. "Tell Earth Command that Haven's Reach is gone. All 70,000 residents. Neural disruption via targeted nanites. No structural damage." She paused, turning Maya's crane over in her hands. "Also tell them that Dr. Cole's final transmission contained the phrase, 'Sanctuary protocols now active.' They'll understand." Earth's response came 18 hours later, broadcast simultaneously to every human colony, research station, and deep space monitoring post in the galaxy. "All Earth citizens, sanctuary protocols are now active. Please stand by." 5 words that changed everything. Within 72 hours, something unprecedented began rippling across space. Not panic or mobilization, something quieter and infinitely more dangerous. On Luna, Cressital stared at the message on his personal terminal. Not a form letter, but something written specifically for him. 15 years ago, you helped us understand Kalari cellular regeneration. That knowledge saved 200,000 human lives during the Capella Plague outbreak. We never forgot. Your world is gone, but your wisdom lives in every person you helped heal. Now we ask, will you help us save what can be saved? It was signed by Dr. Sarah Chen, Director of Colonial Integration. Below her signature was a single line: "The garden remembers every seed." Similar messages went out across the galaxy. Not demands or conscription orders, personal invitations extended to beings who remembered what it felt like to be welcomed when the universe had turned them away. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Vorthan engineers, who'd learned human manufacturing techniques, began volunteering their expertise. Zlathi traders offered shipping routes that bypassed Dominion checkpoints. Kalari scientists shared biotechnology that had taken millennia to develop. Khenki artists created propaganda so beautiful that entire worlds stopped to listen. But it wasn't just refugees. Species that had traded with humanity, studied at human universities, been treated at human hospitals they remembered. More importantly, they had families, friends, entire networks of beings who had been touched by human kindness in ways the Dominion had never bothered to map. Maya Chen, not the lost child, but her namesake, a diplomatic coordinator stationed on Ceres, found herself coordinating something unprecedented. At 28, she had grown up among refugees, spoke 6 languages fluently, and understood the peculiar weight of borrowed hope. The Dominion made a strategic error, she explained, to the emergency colonial assembly session. They assumed we were building client states. We were actually cultivating ecosystems. 3 weeks after Haven's reach, Commander Vex received new orders that made his mandibles click with satisfaction. His fleet would proceed to the Sol system and demonstrate the consequences of defiance to the species that had spread this infection of excessive mercy throughout the galaxy. The Dominion's grand strategy was elegant in its simplicity: make an example of humanity's homeworld that would echo through history, ensuring no species would ever again mistake their restraint for weakness. When Vex's fleet dropped out of hyperspace at Sol's edge, his tactical officer's voice carried a note of confusion. "Commander, the human defense grid. It's not human." Vex studied his displays with growing unease. The defensive formations included Kalari bioadaptive systems that could reconfigure faster than targeting computers could track. Vorthan engineering made ships appear and disappear through spatial distortions. Zlathi predictive algorithms seemed to anticipate his fleet movements before he made them. How is this possible? His tactical officer whispered, "These species are traditional enemies. The Kalari and Vorthans have been at war for centuries." Vex felt something cold settle in his lower stomachs. Not in human space, apparently. A communication request appeared on his display not from Earth Command, but from a vessel broadcasting Kalari identification codes. He accepted it, expecting to face some human admiral using alien technology. The face that appeared on his screen was older, scarred by radiation exposure, but unmistakably familiar. Kestal, the young Kalari from Haven's Reach, now wearing the insignia of a fleet coordinator. "Hello, Commander Vex." Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had found her place in the universe. "You probably don't remember me. I was one of the children whose paper cranes you called meaningless sentiment." Behind her, Vex could see other figures: Vorthans, Zlathi, humans, even a few species he didn't immediately recognize, all working together with unsettling coordination. "You have an opportunity," Kestal continued, "to make a different choice than the one you made on Haven's Reach. You can continue your compliance actions, and we will respond with everything we've learned about protecting what we love. Or you can leave, and we will let you." Vex's voice came out steadier than he felt. "You cannot threaten the Dominion. We maintain stability. We are the established order." Kestal held up something small and white, a paper crane, its folds worn soft by handling. "Commander, Dr. Cole taught us something about gardening. Sometimes the most dangerous weeds look exactly like the plants you're trying to protect. You've spent so long seeing our restraint as weakness that you never learned the difference between choosing not to fight and being unable to." What happened next lasted exactly 14 minutes and 17 seconds. Vex experienced warfare as something beyond his understanding of the concept. His weapons fired into empty space, as human ships flickered through dimensions that shouldn't exist. His targeting systems were overwhelmed by signals that bypassed every encryption protocol the Dominion had developed. His flagship found itself caught in gravitational fields that moved it gently but inexorably away from intended targets. Most disturbing of all, they weren't being destroyed. They were being managed, like dangerous animals being herded by patient handlers who understood their behavior better than they understood themselves. Vex watched his invincible fleet systematically neutered, not through superior firepower but through the application of scientific principles his people had never even theorized. The humans hadn't just hidden weapons, they'd hidden entire branches of physics. When his flagship finally caught in a stasis field that left it powerless but unharmed, his comm crackled with an incoming transmission. Admiral Torres appeared on his screen, speaking from orbit above, a world that should have been helpless. "Commander Vex, your fleet is disabled, but your crews are unharmed. Your ships will be released at the edge of this system with full life support and navigation capability." Torres's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Return to your superiors with this message. The age of compliance through fear is ending. Humanity has spent 2 centuries choosing peace while developing the means to enforce it. That choice is now conditional." The transmission cut, and Vex found his ships suddenly free to move. Around him, the human defensive grid didn't power down. It simply ignored him, ships returning to patrol positions with casual indifference to his presence. For the first time in his 30-year career, Commander Vex chose retreat. The aftermath unfolded across months rather than days. The Dominion's response was, predictably, bureaucratic committees formed to study the Sol incident. Analysts struggled to explain how their intelligence had failed so completely, and hardliners argued for escalation, while moderates whispered about negotiation. But the real changes happened in the spaces between official policies. Worlds that had submitted to Dominion rule began asking uncomfortable questions about protection they weren't receiving. Client species started demanding better terms. Refugee flows that had been stemmed through fear began trickling, then flooding toward human space. 6 months after Haven's reach, the Dominion faced something they'd never encountered in 3 millennia of expansion: organized, coordinated resistance from their own subjects. Maya Chen found herself coordinating relief efforts for 17 different species, across 43 worlds, former Dominion territories that had declared independence and requested alliance protection. The logistical nightmare was complicated by the fact that many of these species had been enemies before humans had shown them another way. "The beautiful chaos," she called it in her reports to Earth Command. Vorthans and Kelari sharing transport ships, Zlathi teaching Grenki children mathematics, former enemies discovering they have more in common than they thought. It wasn't perfect. Old grudges didn't disappear overnight, and some species remained suspicious of others despite human mediation, but it was working messily, imperfectly, but working. The memorial for Haven's Reach became something more than a monument to the dead. It became a pilgrimage site for beings across the galaxy who understood what the sacrifice had meant, not just for humanity, but for the idea that mercy could be stronger than fear, that protection could matter more than conquest. 25 years after Haven's Reach, Dr. Adrian Cole, Maya's son, named for the grandfather whose garden journals he'd inherited, worked his fingers through lunar soil in the memorial dome. Earth hung blue and perfect beyond the transparent walls, surrounded by a constellation of habitats, where dozens of species had learned that sanctuary could be built rather than conquered. His daughter played nearby, with a mixed group of children whose parents had come from across the galaxy, some as refugees, some as immigrants, some as former enemies who discovered that belonging was more powerful than winning. "Grandpapa would have laughed at this chaos," Maya said, settling beside her son on the garden bench. At 57, her hair was beginning to silver, but her eyes still held the determination that had helped rebuild the galaxy's understanding of strength. "The children, or the politics?" Adrian asked, watching his 8-year-old daughter attempt to mediate a dispute between a young Dominion emigrant and a Kalari child over proper seedling spacing techniques. "Everything. All of it." Maya held up a paper letter, the old-fashioned kind that conveyed serious intent. This came from the Dominion's new civilian council. They're requesting assistance with their agricultural reconstruction program. Apparently, centuries of military efficiency made them excellent at destroying ecosystems and terrible at growing food. Adrian smiled, remembering his grandfather's notes about patience and proper growing conditions. What did you tell them? That we'd be happy to send advisors. Along with origami paper, Maya's eyes held mischief. Kestal suggested we start with paper cranes. She says they're excellent for teaching precision and patience. Their conversation was interrupted by a chime from the memorial's communication system. Director Kestal herself appeared on the display, calling from her office on New Kalari, the planet her people had built with human engineering and Vorthan manufacturing expertise. Maya, Adrian, I wanted you to hear this directly from me. The Galactic Assembly vote just concluded. Resolution 2847 passed with only 3 abstentions. The Sanctuary Doctrine is now galactic law. Any species that commits genocide against civilians will face intervention by the Alliance. Maya felt unexpected tears. Papa would be so proud. He would be proud that we never stopped being gardeners, Kestal corrected gently. Even when we learned to be guardians too. After the transmission ended, Adrian and Maya sat in comfortable silence, watching Earth turn slowly against the starfield. Somewhere in the asteroid belt, automated beacons still broadcast the names of Haven's Reaches lost on the anniversary of their sacrifice. Somewhere among the stars, former Dominion worlds were learning that strength didn't require cruelty. Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out something small and white, a paper crane worn soft by decades of careful handling. I found this in Papa's journal. The last entry said, Maya made her first crane today. She wished for tomorrow to be better than today. I think she's right. Adrian took the crane, feeling the accumulated hope in its delicate folds. He was right, too. Above them, children's laughter echoed through the dome as they played among plants that had never grown on Earth, tended by hands representing dozens of worlds, protected by those who'd chosen to remain gardeners even after they'd learned to be something more. The last sanctuary had become the first promise of something better, and the garden grew on, patient and eternal, one seed at a time.